In this week's RotoWire Fantasy Football Top 10 Takeaways podcast, Nick and I are going to talk about how we're surprised about so many smash spots that went bad, some things that went well, at least for me, and some things that not so well for Nick's teams this week. Stay tuned here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the good folks from No House Advantage. I'm Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. Nick is on the wedding tour. He got back in time to do this pod and watch all the games on Sunday and all that came with that. Nick, welcome. What's going on?
Oh, not much, man. Busy week, like you said. I was out in Colorado for a couple days, did some hiking, played some golf, went to a wedding, had to get back for another wedding in Milwaukee on Saturday. So I'm dragging a little bit. Went to bed very, very early by my standards last night, but working our way back to full strength and looking forward to breaking down these games. I mean, for the second straight week, things have gone from really bad to much worse for both the Jaguars and the Packers. But we'll unpack those. I think we need to talk Bears Commanders, though, first.
As is the custom. Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So Bears Commanders, hey, we saw the Colts and the Broncos. We're like, oh, what a disastrous game. And Bears and Commanders said, okay, hold my old style here. The Bears, come on. They moved the ball at least, but the red zone package is just atrocious. I mean, just disastrous results. A little unlucky, with the deflection, but Fields misses an open receiver, 2 drops on the last sequence there. They should have won this game. The touchdown they allowed was on a muff punt. I was all ready to mock the Commanders for punting on 4th and 1 from midfield, but they're like, hey, we know Velus Jones, old man that he is going to drop that punt again, and here we are. That's our strategy. That is our offense. And turns out it was right.
Had it not been for that muff punt, I think Chicago maybe does win this game. Washington could not do anything either. Both these teams, there's kind of a line where everybody's starting to make fun of these primetime Thursday games, and the Broncos have been a feature in that, and they play again tonight, so we'll see how that goes. But this game to me was actually really interesting because it was so poorly played. Like, there's a difference between like good defensive football and just like comical football on both sides of the ball, and that's what we got on Thursday night. And almost any other team, any other situation, when the Bears have that final drive, Justin Fields has the long run, brings them all the way down to the 5-yard line. Any other team finishes that off. You got 4 plays from the 5-yard line to punch that in. But I'm sitting there watching that, and I'm thinking, like, there's no way that the Bears are getting this. Like, how could you have any faith in Chicago converting this when they've already thrown an interception inside the 5-yard line? They already went out on downs on a 4th and goal earlier in the game. I felt bad for Justin Fields. I didn't necessarily feel like he was the issue in this game. Did have that bad miss in the first half, on kind of a tight end wheel swing type of route where he easily should have hit that for a touchdown. But man, this was an unbelievable game, really by both sides, but especially Chicago's. The lack of execution in the red zone, it's been an issue for a lot of teams, but not on this level.
Yeah, and neither team can adequately protect the quarterback. I think that's one of the things. Fields is going to get just wrecked this year. He was hurting. You could tell multiple times he got looked at. You could tell he was in a lot of pain. He was a warrior for playing through it all. But sometimes we get into this whole deify the player for playing hurt thing, and that's how they get hurt worse in the long run there. But yeah, it was tough all around. Commanders, there's Carson Wentz had himself a weird week. You have a coach that's saying, basically throwing him under the bus, hinting that it wasn't his choice. And then, of course, the coach denying that, walking that back later, but playing pretty awful in between. They're really, and didn't get helped by his receivers. Curtis Samuel with a terrible drop, 2 drops on one series, but one was for a touchdown. That hurt too.
Yeah, Samuel had a couple killer drops. Washington just, as usual, could not really move the ball in this game. And every now and then they would kind of break a big play, and that's kind of the entire offense at this point for Washington is like go 3 and out 6 times, and then have one key drive that keeps you in the game. At least in weeks past, Wentz has been able to pile up some yardage. That certainly was not the case in this game. Just 12 completions for under 100 yards. Like you said, both quarterbacks completely under siege the entire night. I mean, for a guy who's as mobile and quick and fast and strong as Justin Fields is, like the fact that he was sacked 5 times says a lot. I think if it was a more statuesque quarterback, he might have been sacked 8 or 9 times in this game, because he's consistently able to get out of sacks that a lot of quarterbacks would take. So that Chicago offensive line, we talked about it coming into the year. I know Daniel Jeremiah called it like the worst line he's ever seen.
Yeah,
it held up better than I thought it would through the first couple of weeks, but I think things are kind of coming home to roost a little bit with this Bears team after a hotter than expected start with those 2 wins in the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, it could have been 3-3 if they had just converted in the red zone. It's kind of crazy. Washington's pass rush is legit. That's the one good thing they have going for them on defense. I like how the coaching staff after the we need to get Antonio Gibson more snaps. Guys, it's entirely under your control. He got 15.
Yeah, that's the Matt LaFleur. We need to get Aaron Jones more snaps special.
Yes, exactly. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. Hey, they face Green Bay next week, so your problem versus my problem game there.
Yeah. A couple weeks ago, I was telling everybody who would listen, like, oh man, Packers, everybody's down on them after some struggles early on, but they're going to be sitting at 6-1. They got the Giants, the Jets, the Commanders in succession. They're not losing any of those games. I mean, Packers, Commanders in Washington next week. I think the Packers are like 5-point favorites. I don't know how you could confidently pick Green Bay to beat any team on the road right now.
No, I don't think so. I think, although I'm going to argue that the Giants are better than people realize. I know and that's hard. It's weird to say that because they're 5-1. So the record stands for itself a little bit. But I think they're well coached, and I think that goes just a long, long way towards that. And I think their defense is better than people realize too. I think there's some pretty good defensive personnel on this team.
Yeah, getting Kayvon Thibodeau back has been a big deal. He made a huge play at the end of that Baltimore game this past week. I mean, I'm going to have to admit defeat. I really didn't think the Giants were a good team. I still don't think they're like a win a playoff game ceiling type of team, but they have to be taken seriously at this point. They really do. You could kind of make excuses for a lot of their other wins, but that was just a legitimate win by them against a really good Baltimore team. I loved Baltimore in that spot. I thought they were going to be the team that kind of reset the expectations for the New York Giants. So coming off that win against Green Bay, to pile this one on top of it, I mean, it's astounding. I really, Brian Dable, the way that he's coached this team, I mean, the results versus talent on this roster is about as stark as you're ever going to see, right? I mean, this is a horrific group of skill position players outside of Saquon Barkley. You have a guy who we pretty much universally agreed was a well below average quarterback in Daniel Jones. And yeah, the defense is good, but it's not a great defense. It's not like you have legitimate, annual Pro Bowlers on this defense. I think this is as big of a, just getting the most out of the talent coaching job as we've seen in recent memory.
I agree. And it helps that they're in the NFC. I mean, who's good in the NFC? I think the Eagles, I think we can argue, are good. I think the Cowboys are pretty good. They have a quarterback problem. We'll see what happens when Dak comes back. Remember, Dak didn't look good last game. The Bucs just went on the road and lost to the Steelers, for crying out loud. The Niners went on the road and lost to the Falcons, who I've argued are better than, at the beginning of the season, I argued they were better than their projected win total, but I didn't expect this. We'll talk about that game.
Right.
And then, there's the Giants. I mean, the Eagles are legitimately good. I'm convinced about that. Yes. The Vikings, I think, are pretty good. I mean, they got outgained by 200 yards yesterday against Miami.
Right.
They kind of stole that. I mean, if Jalen Waddle doesn't fumble, and I know we're previewing a lot of games, but I mean, that could have ended a whole lot differently too.
I don't weeks in a row for Minnesota where they've kind of snuck out a win that they tried to give away.
Yeah. Just a lot of mediocre teams in the NFL right now, and especially in the NFC. All right, let's keep on breaking down the games that were. And speaking of mediocrity, there's the Bengals and the Saints, because this was an interesting, weird game. The Bengals defense, prior to this week, had been really rock solid. I thought that, hey, this is a legit defense. They had the hardest time getting off the field against the Saints. Saints were just converting every third down for a while. Andy Dalton was having a pretty solid game. Didn't help the Bengals that they fumbled on a punt return, setting up the first touchdown for the Saints when they got a token stop. And then, they kept a drive alive with a roughing the passer, which was the most ridiculous roughing the passer I've seen in a while. Trey Hendrickson hit Dalton like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi after he hits him. I mean, it was so obvious to call it. You don't touch it. It wasn't even a hard hit, but the fact is there was no reason to hit him. period.
Yep.
None. And they had their stop already. I mean, I think the pass was already incomplete by the time he hit him. Just horrible play there. But the offense came alive. The offense finally, was the narrative is Burrow to Chase. Finally worked.
Yeah, I think we saw what this offense can look like when T. Higgins plays a full game. Tyler Boyd is engaged. Jamar Chase had the long touchdown in the second half. Kind of been waiting for that play. It feels like the entire season so far. I mean, 7 for 132 and 2 scores for Jamar Chase. That is the guy that fantasy managers have been expecting for these last 5 weeks. And this was easily Joe Burrow's best fantasy game of the year. Yep. 4 total touchdowns, 300 yards, no picks. Did only take 3 sacks. Found himself on the move quite a bit. It felt like every time this game flashed to red zone, Joe Burrow, was making a big run on a third down. Had 4 for 25 and a rushing touchdown as well. But yeah, I mean, that Cincinnati defense did a great job limiting points. That's for sure. But yeah, giving up 22 first downs, 8 third down conversions. At one point, Jeff, they gave up 3 consecutive 14-play drives to the Saints, but all 3 of those ended in a field goal.
Yeah, it was the classic bend but don't break. The time of possession at one point was like 10 minutes in favor of the Saints, and narrowed towards the end.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bengals were a little lucky in this one too. I mean, the last play they kind of got away with what could have been a pass interference a little, but it was kind of an inadvertent feet got tangled up sort of thing there. And the Saints, I mean, keep in mind the Saints were starting Andy Dalton, and they were down their top 3 receivers. It was Traquan Smith and Marquez Callaway and Juwan Johnson and Rashid Shaheed. Yes. Eli Apple was getting targeted big time. I mean, Apple had one big hit, but for the most part, he was Toast Patterson out there. So, there's still some things that need to be worked out. Burrow got sacked 3 times, but he was pressured a lot of other times.
Yep.
He made this amazing escape on a third down where he kind of went Mahomes and just scrambled backwards, got out, made the completion with the great scramble. He had the rushing touchdown. Great fantasy day for Andy Dalton. Huge fantasy day. A lot of third down conversion. So for Joe Burrow, God, I'm going to just do that this whole segment talking about this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess by Dalton standards, maybe it wasn't so bad, but I wouldn't say it was a great fantasy day.
No, yeah, Burrow with a huge fantasy day. Dalton with a pretty solid real life day except for like the last 2 drives. Saints had a terrible punt on their penultimate drive. They just shanked it, and that gave the Bengals field position. They scored the first play out after that too. That was the 60-yard touchdown to Chase. It was good to see Chase get unlocked. He got the touchdown earlier. In fact, reporters were saying the team had more life in them after the first Chase touchdown. They're like, all right, this is us. And you could see that a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really what's been missing from this Bengals offense. I mean, they've been able to move the ball. They've kind of been able to nickel and dime their way down the field, but they haven't had those, break a tackle and all of a sudden he's gone 60 yards down the sideline type of plays that we saw from Jamar Chase in a huge spot in this game.
Yep.
Right? I mean, this was when, Cincinnati at that time, couldn't quite get the stop that it needed, to pull ahead in this game and really feel like it took charge. But yeah, that was the first play of a drive with under 2 minutes left in the game, with Cincinnati at that point trailing. So, I mean, it could not have come in a bigger spot. Those are exactly the type of plays that you're expecting from a guy like Jamar Chase. And all of a sudden now, sitting as the wide receiver 6, that is heading into the Monday night game, of course. But still, I mean, it on a day when a lot of there wasn't a ton of like major fantasy production around the league, relatively low scoring games everywhere you look. A lot of the stars were relatively quiet. Jamar Chase, all the way, knocking on the door of being a top 5 receiver again. Yeah.
Bengals went away from the running game, even though it was relatively effective. Only 14 rushes, 4 of which were by Burrow. So Mixon had 8 carries, but he did have the receiving touchdown, so it salvaged his fantasy day. Kamara ran really well. The Saints ran really well. The Bengals missed DJ Reader in the middle of that defensive line, big time. He sets the tone for everything there. But all that said, I felt like they didn't get full use out of Kamara. Taysom Hill was a problem, 5 for 39. They just didn't go to that frequently. Hill had 4 passing attempts too. So he was in a lot of packages. They just chose not to use him a ton on this one here. All right. Before we move on to the next game, all of our podcasts are on the Blue Wire Network. Here's some ads from them. Thank you for indulging us with the Blue Wire ads. We thank Blue Wire for hosting our podcast. All right. Game to me that I got hella wrong. There was a lot of them this week, by the way. But Niners and the Falcons. I mean, the Falcons jumped the Niners right away. It's 14-0 before you knew it. Marcus Mariota had one of the most efficient days I've ever seen. 13 of 14 for 129 and 2 touchdowns, no picks. And he ran the ball not 6 times for 50 yards and a touchdown. They only threw the ball 14 times, but it didn't matter. They were winning the whole game. And that's exactly the formula Arthur Smith wants to see.
Yeah, exactly. I think this was kind of the prototypical game for the Atlanta Falcons. They controlled the ball early on, got a defensive touchdown on the fumble return early on. Yep. All of a sudden it's 14-0. And you just kind of felt, even like the first and second quarter, it's like, man, I don't know if the 49ers really have it today. And obviously they stormed back. They did tie the game at 14, but to me, that was kind of the biggest turning point is after the 49ers put together that second touchdown for Brandon Ayuk. That was kind of midway through the second quarter. You're thinking, all right, this is an inflection point for Atlanta. And what do? They put together an 11-play drive against this San Francisco defense and then force another turnover before the half. And we should note, tons of injuries all over the defense for the 49ers. This was not necessarily a full strength effort, but kind of a pretty big letdown spot for a team that we felt really good about these last couple of weeks, coming out of that game where they just bullied the Rams. They put together a pretty cohesive beatdown of Panthers last week. And our pal John McKechnie pointed this out to me. The 49ers stayed on the East Coast. I kind of looked at this as like, man, you got to make consecutive trips all the way across the country. That could be a little bit of a letdown spot, but you can't even blame that. They didn't even go home. So yeah, just kind of a weird result for sure on a weekend full of weird results. But that's kind of the thing that, all the Packers fans who I've been talking to over the last 24 hours, it's like, yeah, things aren't good here, but the 49ers just lost by 2 touchdowns to the Falcons. The Buccaneers just lost at home to the Pittsburgh Steelers.
It was
the Rams
in Pittsburgh.
Are a complete mess. It's like all the teams that we thought were good, including Green Bay, might not be good.
Yeah, it was in Pittsburgh, by the way, the Tampa Bay game. That was a road game.
Yeah,
but nonetheless, I mean, it was still, they shot the bed. I mean, there's no doubt about it there. I mean, the big disappointment for me was Jeff Wilson in this game. 7 for 25. He lost that killer fumble.
Big fumble.
Just huge fumble there. They couldn't get the running game going. And I think what happened is no Trent Williams. Atlanta is just like, okay, you're not going to beat us running the ball. We're going to make Jimmy G beat us. And he had those 2 big plays. Ayuk, Kittle got his, 8 for 83, but they had these drives and they couldn't convert. I mean, Jimmy G threw for nearly 300 yards, but they just couldn't convert when they needed it most. And I'm looking forward to the rewatch in this game just to see, okay, what exactly went wrong? How can they get around this here? I'm sure they're going to be watching a lot of film here too. If you've been holding on to Elijah Mitchell for this long, keep holding, because I think that you can see that Jeff Wilson's fine, but Mitchell is a different level of back when he's healthy. It's just the problem is when healthy is the huge caveat in his life.
Yeah, and it looked like Jeff Wilson's stock on the way up after a good couple of weeks before this. But yeah, losing that fumble, I mean, that's a pretty good way to land in the doghouse, and that was a killer for the 49ers. But I mean, bottom line, it's like nice day for Brandon Ayuk, 8 for 83, 2 touchdowns. George Kittle had his most productive game as well. Kind of got the usual from Deebo Samuel, although he did not get in the end zone. If you're the 49ers, you do not want Jimmy G throwing the ball 41 times. Like you're not going to win many games when that's the result.
It's like Joe Flacco throwing it 50 times. That's not a formula for success. Just don't do that.
Yes. Not for this team, no.
Yeah. Caleb Huntley was just as active this week as Tyler Algier on the running game. Neither were all that great. They averaged less than 4 yards per carry, each of them. Avery Williams snuck in a couple carries. I mean, honestly, they didn't do a whole lot offensively. I mean, they had a couple of sustained drives when they needed it. And, there was only 7 points between the two teams in the second half. It was mostly a defensive fest in the second half.
Yeah, it was the turnovers. I mean, 3-0 turnover margin for Atlanta. I think, returning one of those for a touchdown, that was huge. Getting that stop before the half with the interception, also massive. I think that was the biggest difference. In terms of other fantasy notes, like we got to talk about Kyle Pitts, who did get in the end zone, but still, man, 3 catches on 3 targets for only 19 yards. Was outsnapped in this game by fellow tight end Parker Hesse. That's not a great sign.
Because they're running the ball. And Hesse, they want to block, and Pitts is not a blocker.
Exactly. I mean, he's still out there in passing situations, but only played just over half of the total offensive snaps. I mean, it just continues to be a disappointment. I don't, even with the touchdown, I don't really feel any differently about him.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really all a game scripting. If they're trailing, you got a chance.
Yep.
But if they're playing with the lead, this is they don't want to throw. Period. They're on the road against Cincinnati next week, so we'll see about that. In theory, they should be trailing.
You would think, yeah, you would think. I mean, it's kind of an interesting dynamic where it's like if the Falcons are playing well, that means that Kyle Pitts probably isn't doing very much. But
Right.
I don't know. Maybe we didn't think too much into the game script, factor when RotoWire as a company, personally aligned itself with Kyle Pitts during the preseason. But
Right.
I mean, the Falcons just look like they're going to continue to be really frisky the rest of the year. They don't appear all that interested in like trying to tank for Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or any of that. And with as much parity as there appears to be really in both conferences, with the exception of like 4 or 5 teams, there's not a lot of like obvious situations where you could say, oh, the Falcons will for sure be trailing in this game.
Right. Exactly. Hey, the formula is working. We want to complain, but they're 3-3. And
exactly.
They could have won
2 of their next 4 are against the Panthers too. And then the Bears, Commanders, and the Steelers after that. So not a ton of scripts where you project the Falcons to be down by double digits in the second half.
And wasn't their total like at 5? 5.5?
I think it was 5.5. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Pats, Browns. This was kind of a beatdown. 38-15. And it never really was close. I mean, the Browns, again, speaking of formulas you don't want to have, Jacoby Brissett throwing the ball 45 times. They and committing killer turnovers too. 2 interceptions. He got sacked 4 times. He lost a fumble. It just really was bad. Chester Rogers fumbled a kick return. Yeah, thanks for showing up today. I mean, that was late, so that didn't really matter. But they didn't get Chubb untracked. At one point, it was 9 for 27. He got a late 18-yard run. He only had 12 carries though. I mean, the formula for the Browns is Atlanta-esque. They need to run the ball a ton, and they couldn't get off the field and they couldn't sustain drives. I mean, the Pats just said, "Okay, Brissett, beat us if you can." It was a Brissett revenge game too. I guess the revenge was had by the Pats though.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a familiar opponent, Jacoby Brissett, for Bill Belichick and that staff, and that certainly looked to be the case. I mean, this is the second straight week where it felt like New England went into somewhat of a 50-50 game. The Lions had some steam going into last week's contest. They're starting Bailey Zappi for both of these games, so you're just kind of thinking like, man, I don't really know what to expect. And for the second week in a row, I mean, this was a wire-to-wire beatdown by New England, maybe not quite as dramatic as last week. And it should be noted that the Browns had a chance to make this interesting. I think it was early in the fourth quarter that they got a touchdown on the board and they missed the 2-point conversion that would have cut it to a 7-point game. And at that point, it kind of felt like, all right, New England's going to control the ball and take care of business, which they ultimately did. But had Cleveland been able to convert that 2-point, I think it might have gotten interesting. I mean, Bailey Zappi, fantastic in this game, 24 of 34, 309 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, only took 2 sacks against that Cleveland defensive line. Ramondre Stevenson didn't necessarily pile up the yardage, but ripped off a late touchdown. I mean, 19 for 76 and 2 scores. You're very happy with that, of course, on a day with no Damian Williams. And, at receiver kind of continues to be, that kind of rotating door. You don't know if it's going to be Devontae Parker, who's their leading receiver this week. You don't know if it's going to be Kendrick Bourne. He didn't really do much at all. But both Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith getting in the mix, 61 yards apiece, and Henry also getting in the end zone.
On everybody's waiver wire after we dropped him, though, unfortunately. At least I dropped him in the places where I had him. It was a bad week for the faded tight ends. I mean, to fade tight ends that we were in because Gesicki went nuts and Hunter Henry scored. So it's like, now they do it after I've given up on him. But that's the tight ends in a nutshell.
Yeah, I was thinking about you watching that Mike Gesicki gritty, and I'm just thinking, man, if only Jeff Erickson could benefit from this.
Yeah, the Vegas League, I think I've had and dropped both Gesicki and Henry, if I'm not mistaken. No, you had Henry in that league, so you probably dropped him. Or
yeah, I either dropped him or have not been starting him. I can assure you of that.
Yeah, but Ramondre Stevenson wasn't super efficient, only 4 yards a carry, but the 2 touchdowns will pay the bills, so he was fine. Tyquan Thornton, 2 touchdowns, and I like that he was out. He ran routes. I think 76% of the pass plays he was running routes, so you like seeing that. And 3 carries, and so they're fine. He adds a dimension the other receivers couldn't bring. So I think even when Aguilar comes back, Thornton has a role with this team.
I think so too. And I mean, Aguilar's had some monster, mistakes over these last couple of weeks as well. So I think he probably gets one or two more chances to be that guy. But even when he's back, I mean, he might be one more fumble or one more big drop that leads to an interception away from kind of a slight demotion, which has kind of followed him throughout his career. And yeah, like I said, I mean, seeing Tyquan Thornton get 3 carries, to me, that's huge. New England has not really had a guy like that in a while. And I think that's kind of what this offense is missing. But overall, for me, I'm just really impressed with Bailey Zappi. And I think we thought this offense would have to be really limited under Zappi. I mean, it kind of seemed like after that Packers game, it's like, all right, they're going to have to go into a shell. They're just going to be pounding the ball every single game until Mac Jones is healthy. I mean, in no world did I see Bailey Zappi throwing for 300-plus yards. And, I mean, this Cleveland defense, certainly not what we expected, that's for sure. I mean, they were without Denzel Ward in this game. They were without Jadeveon Clowney. But still, man, I mean, it's Bailey Zappi's good, but at the end of the day, it's Bailey Zappi. You can't be letting this guy throw for 300 yards on 24 completions.
Yeah. I think kind of happened here is that Cleveland knew that they had a big problem stopping the run. And I think they overcompensated for that or compensated for that. Maybe not overcompensated, but compensated for that. Figure is their best chance, kind of like force Zappi to beat you, kind of like the Patriots are going to force Brissett to beat you, kind of like other teams are going to force Jimmy G to beat you. I mean, you say about 10 different quarterbacks, maybe more right now that, the quarterback's not going to hurt us. So until he proves that he can, well, he proved that he could. So there you go. I mean, there was a lot of running after the catch for this game too. I mean, Myers made a big play. Parker had a big play. Jonnu Smith had a big play. That they had all this whole time, but this was a beatdown. Cleveland, this is the first game where you can't say, oh, they could have won this game. This one, I mean, they got a missed 2-point conversion away from being down 7. Almost recovered the onside kick, ruled illegal touching on that, but they would have been down 2 scores after that onside kick. When you have to recover an onside kick to be part of your within 1 score thing, I mean, it shows you're really not that close. Before we move on to the next game, let's do note from our friends at No House Advantage. No House Advantage is changing the game by offering the most dynamic fantasy sports platform available today. Play and pick 'em contest versus other people for the shot at winning big cash prizes. Download the app, choose a contest, select your player props, earn points for correct picks, and climb the leaderboard for your shot at hundreds of thousands of dollars every week. You can also test your skills versus the house and 20 times your entry if you hit all your picks. Bet on up to 5 player prop over-unders and individual player matchups across every major sports league, including the NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA, MMA, and NASCAR. Sign up now with promo code NHAWire. That's NHAWire at nohouseadvantage.com or download the app on the app stores to get a first deposit match up to $25. Make sure to check out No House Advantage today and experience daily fantasy sports redefined, because it's not just how you play, but also where you play. You don't want to miss out on this. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. We're breaking down week 6, our top 10 takeaways. All right, let's deal with the bad stuff here. We're going to go back to back, unfortunately, with you here, as these are the next 2 games listed in box score wise on ESPN. I promise I'm not trying to make it do Packers and Jags daily double, but let's do it anyhow. Jets Packers. Oh my God, the Packers look like a disaster. I mean, they at no point was their offense like, okay, this is the better team on the field. I didn't feel that way at all. Now I'm going to do the rewatch and see if my instincts are wrong about this, but I felt like the whole game their offense was doing nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I watched this one from start to finish here. Of course, had that on locally in Milwaukee, and what you saw, and flashing into the game is exactly what it was. I mean, Aaron Rodgers very nearly threw a pick 6 on the first series of the game. Luckily, it was called back, and the ball just barely hit the ground before ricocheting off the hand of Robert Tonyan and into the hands of Sauce Gardner. So even though it was called off, it just felt like a really bad omen to begin this game. The Packers, of course, end up going 3 and out. That was on 3rd down. They punt anyway. And they just had no juice. They had no juice whatsoever for the 3rd straight week. And they were really lucky, I think, to escape that game against the Patriots a few weeks ago with a win. Even last week against the Giants, they did open up a 17-3 lead, but before completely shutting it down. But I mean, this was just a wire-to-wire, terrible effort, really on both sides of the ball. I mean, in the first half, Packers only allowed a field goal to the Jets, but the defense completely fell apart in the 3rd quarter, and the offense at no point ever got it going. It's just some sloppy play, a missed handoff between Rodgers and A.J. Dillon, just a ton of 3 and outs. This offense, appears completely broken. And the obvious difference between this year and last year is that they don't have Devontae Adams. And that's a big deal, but I don't think removing Devontae Adams makes you go from like Super Bowl favorite in your conference to all of a sudden you're taking embarrassing losses to the Jets and the Giants in back-to-back weeks. Like, to me, the issues are much deeper seated than just not replacing Devontae Adams.
Yeah, that's right. The Jets scored that touchdown to go up 10-3, and then immediately after got the blocked punt touchdown. And that kind of ended the game. I mean, the Packers did get it to 17-10, but the Jets then were able to drive again. I think it's just the defense got worn down. I mean, the Jets didn't, you look at the Jets total numbers. I mean, Wilson only threw for 110. Another team that doesn't want to throw the ball as much. We're starting to see like, don't have your mediocre quarterback throw it 50 times. What a great idea. We have this stud running back. Let's give it to him. Yeah. Weird, strange. But the Packers just could, the Packers couldn't pass against the Jets. Every team passes against the Jets.
Yeah. Absolutely. And here's something. I mean, you mentioned Green Bay getting that punt blocked. I mean, that felt like kind of the death knell. They also had a field goal blocked earlier in the game. I don't want to be in the room when Rich Bisaccia has his special teams meeting this week. I don't think that's going to go well for anybody. But the Packers also blocked a Jets punt in this game. And to kind of give you a pretty good summary of where this Packers offense is at, they block a punt, they get the ball at the 36-yard line of the Jets, and that drive ends in a punt. They end up losing 8 yards and punting after getting that huge break. I mean, that to me is pretty emblematic of where this team is at. I mean, you get a huge momentum shift. You're at home. It feels like, all right, this is the play we needed. We're set up well here, and you go 3 and out and punt. I mean, it was that kind of day.
It was, and they're in a bad spot right now. I don't know what to do to figure this out. How they can figure it out. I mean, some of this has to be put on Rodgers. It's not just taking. It's not just taking away Adams. I think Rodgers is a lesser version of himself right now.
Absolutely. I mean, accuracy wise, it's not there. Decision making wise, and I think he's suffering from kind of the same issues as Russell Wilson, where I think his escapability, and obviously he's much older. You shouldn't expect to be able to escape sacks, but I mean, he's taking sacks that 2-3 years ago he just wasn't taking. He was either able to step out of it, he had maybe better awareness to get rid of the ball. I mean, there were a couple of like Matt Ryan type of sacks on Aaron Rodgers in this game where he just kind of turtled up and had to take it. The offensive line was also pretty rough. I mean, this was pretty easily the worst game I think Elgin Jenkins has ever played in the NFL. He was a huge liability for them all afternoon. That was a part of it, but it just felt like a total letdown. I mean, this is now the fourth or fifth time after the game where Matt LaFleur is saying, we got to do a better job getting Aaron Jones touches. Well, he had 9 carries in this game, and he had 3 receptions. I don't think 12 is enough. A.J. Dillon, continues to be a huge letdown. I was all over A.J. Dillon as kind of an RB2, RB3, kind of mid to late round guy you could get at an affordable price. He's been a complete disaster all season. I looked this up this morning. He has 3 broken tackles on the year, just not running really with the force that you would expect from someone of that size. I mean, his effectiveness year over year is just way down, especially compared to last season. So that's part of it. But yeah, man, it's really tough right now. And I think the one like somewhat silver lining, that maybe like the copper lining that you could put out there for the Packers is, look, this team faced no adversity whatsoever in the regular season the last 2 years. And then when they faced adversity in the playoffs, they completely folded. So if you want to make the argument that, hey, maybe it's good for them, maybe they need something like this, as kind of a catalyst for this regular season, that sure, I could buy into that argument, but you need to prove that you could bounce back, because right now this kind of feels like a runaway train where, they got the Commanders next week. You feel relatively good about winning that game, given the circumstances. But after that, you got to go play the Buffalo Bills on Sunday Night Football. And as of right now, I mean, that looks like it could be a huge embarrassment. Yeah.
Although I will say one thing we've learned, it's a week-to-week reshuffle. As some of the games that we're about to talk about, they can figure things out, or they can compensate accordingly. And maybe that'll change things a little bit there. But rough result. Indy and Jacksonville. This is a game that, I mean, for 3 quarters, this was the Jags game. For the most part, I mean, it was a back and forth. It was 14-13 and a half, but the Jags felt in control. Trevor Lawrence played his butt off here. 20 of 22, did get sacked 4 times, but it was a mistake-free game for Trevor Lawrence, and you can't ask much more than that. They came out lacking, though. They let Matt Ryan throw all over him. And that's not something I expected to see. Deion Jackson was a force until he got hurt with the quad injury. And it'll probably be, if you missed out on the Deion Jackson window, it's probably too late. Not because everyone's going to grab him, but because he's hurt now. And Taylor will probably be back sometime soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said it well, man. I mean, offensively, Jacksonville, I thought, played fairly well. Excuse me. We saw a pretty conservative game plan. I mean, you see Lawrence 20 of 22 for 165. That absolutely checks out. It was a ton of short passes. It was a ton of screens. Yeah. I think they saw what happened the last couple of weeks, and they kind of needed a confidence builder type of game for Trevor Lawrence. And he played well. He executed it, but they weren't asking him to do nearly as much as they were the last couple of weeks. So I'm still a little bit hesitant on Lawrence. I mean, this was another game, much like Green Bay, where he was not helped at all by the offensive line. This has not been a great Colts defense by any means, but they were consistently able to get to Lawrence in this game. For the second straight week, didn't see a whole lot from James Robinson. It was Lawrence running in the 2 touchdowns, and then JaMychal Hasty rips one off for a long touchdown run. At that point, the Jags were up 14-3. I'm feeling great. Matt Ryan's not really doing much at that point, but really from like the middle of the second quarter on, they just could not get stops whatsoever. And, Trayvon Walker had another really bad penalty on a 3rd and long on the drive that ended up turning into the go-ahead touchdown for the Indianapolis Colts late in that game. But man, it's one thing to give up 389 yards to Matt Ryan on 58 attempts. Like, that's fine. You kind of want Matt Ryan throwing the ball 58 times at this point in his career, but you don't force a turnover and you don't get a single sack on Matt Ryan. Like, what has happened?
The most sackable player in the NFL.
He didn't even fumble. I mean, he's now like, he's losing steam if he's going to try to break that fumbles record. I don't know how no sacks is one thing, but like, he was barely under pressure, man. I watched this whole game all day to throw, especially even in these obvious passing situations. I thought the Jaguars defense is really what let them down. I mean, we're 3 weeks removed from the Jaguars shutting out this team in Jacksonville, and to allow 34 points to an offense that a week and a half ago looked like it might be a bottom 3 unit in the league. Really, really disappointing.
And the Jaguars defense that I thought had some potential, and they were a streamer this week, and I streamed them for no points. So that was fun. That really hurt. They get the Giants this upcoming week. So again, another sackable quarterback, but they're out of my circle of trust. They're out.
They're absolutely out. They are in bad team until proven otherwise territory. I feel like a fool for buying in on this team after the Chargers game. I truly thought that they might actually be a good team, and the defense was a big reason for that. I really thought this was like a playmaking defense, that they attacked you. Even in that Eagles game, they started with a pick 6. I thought they played the Eagles pretty well, but man, things have come crashing down in a real hurry for this team. That is for sure. And I mean, this was such a classic same old Jaguars game. You're giving up 3rd downs. You're having killer penalties. You're taking sacks when you absolutely can't take sacks. I mean, the Colts were 10 of 15 on 3rd down in this game. I mean, that is completely unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of that across the league. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, penalties were a killer there. And I did see like some killer ones. It wasn't the volume. There's only 4 for 44. It's just when they did it. And that's always rough. So yeah. Other noteworthy things. ETN looked good again. Really good.
Very good.
Yeah,
he looked great in this game. He apologized on Twitter to his fantasy managers for not finishing off that long run that he had in the second quarter. But yeah, he looked great in this game. It's kind of the second straight week now where the Jaguars overall have kind of struggled, but he stood out. James Robinson started to slow down a little bit, and 10 carries for ETN. I feel like they felt like they needed a little bit more explosion in this offense, and between he and Hasty, they certainly got it. I continue to feel good about him. Rest of the season, I think he's going to continue to pick up steam, but kind of interested to see where things go for James Robinson, because this is the second straight week now where it feels like they've wanted to establish him. He's been, a lot of the reason that they had success early on, but as we saw yesterday, they're kind of willing to go away from him if it seems like he doesn't have it right away.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, ETN's got the burst in that Robinson doesn't have, but ETN makes the mistakes Robinson doesn't make. So that's the trade-off there. So
they
question
snaps almost evenly.
Yeah. So you're right. I question whether they're, how they're going to handle it in the future, but he's just like an ascendant rookie. I treat him like that. Mm-hmm. Eventually he's going to get more and more work. He just has to. I think for this offense to be more dynamic, they have to. a little bit there. Kevin asked a question about Aaron Jones. We were talking about the Packers earlier. Would you trade Aaron Jones for Dameon Pierce? Pierce has already had his bye. I don't think there's a workload concern with him. But man, I mean, this is your second round pick at worst, or maybe even late first for a guy that we were saying was a reach in the fourth round. Now, more likely a fifth round guy. But Pierce is clearly taken over in Houston. What do you think?
Well, I mean, Pierce ranks higher thus far in terms of average fantasy points per game. He's averaging about 2 more in PPR formats than Aaron Jones. So this is, I mean, it's a legitimate question. It's not one that you hope you'd have to be asking yourself if you're an Aaron Jones manager, but it is legit. I still think I would stick it out with Aaron Jones. I would. I just, maybe part of it is just the level of investment that, personally, you don't really feel great about punting on that. I mean, the Texans offense and the Green Bay offense, those are fairly comparable at this point, given what we've seen from Green Bay this season.
Just such a sad statement.
I guess part of me wants to trust Matt LaFleur when every single week he says we need to do a better job of getting the ball to Aaron Jones. Maybe at some point they will actually do that. If they do, I still think he's the higher end option. But yeah, man, I mean, it's crazy that this is a legit question, but I'd stick with Jones, but it's close. I mean, I wouldn't fault you if you went the other way.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think I would stick with Jones too. But the fact that it's a question speaks volumes. All right. Exactly. Minnesota and Miami. Minnesota improves to 5-1. And yet, Nick, I still don't know how good they really are.
Second straight week where they come out with a win. They're sitting at 5-1. They kind of extend their lead on the Packers in the division. I think we could pretty much hand the division to Minnesota at this point with what we've seen from Green Bay. But they begged Chicago to get back into this game last week and kind of needed a fluky play to really put them away. And same thing this week. It's Skylar Thompson / Teddy Bridgewater. I have no idea how Teddy Bridgewater ended up, being allowed to come into this game. Apparently he was concussed enough to not start, but not quite concussed enough to not play at all. But he throws for over 300 yards on this Minnesota defense. And, Minnesota didn't even score in the first quarter. Like their first 4 drives were 3-and-out punts. So it took a while to get going. And, it does feel like they've kind of had every single game. There's been a point where it could go one way or the other. And with the exception of that Eagles game, they found ways to win against the Lions, Saints, Bears, and Dolphins. But yeah, like you said, none of them have felt as convincing as they should.
Some fun stats from this game. Total offensive yards, 458 for Miami, 234 for Minnesota. Penalties, though, 10 for 97 for Miami, just 2 for 20 for Minnesota. And of course, 3 turnovers for Miami, 0 for Minnesota. So this game was about mistakes. Jalen Waddle with that middle of the field, really kind of an unforced fumble there, was a killer play. They were driving and at that point in time, had a chance to go ahead and take the lead. And they put the ball on the ground. That was a killer. And Bridgewater. So here's the thing. Bridgewater cleared concussion protocol over the weekend, I think. He had a full practice on Friday. But they said they wanted to go with Thompson because Thompson was going to get the reps on Wednesday, Thursday. They wanted to have some certainty. The Dolphins being this, the focal point of this concussion scrutiny, they knew that everything had to be perfect before Bridgewater was going to be allowed to play. And sure enough, that's what happened. Also, Miami got sacked 6 times in this game too. So it was all those you look at the total scoring, total yards, you're like, how the heck did this happen? And it's sacks, turnovers, and penalties. Okay, got it. That's what happened. But yeah, Minnesota, I mean, they didn't move the ball all that well. Justin Jefferson, we were getting frustrated with him, had that big 47-yard play to kind of salvage his day, but he didn't get in the end zone. 6 for 107, though. That'll be enough to pay the bills. But, it was Thielen that got the touchdown and the 2-point conversion. You're like, just throw me a bone here with Jefferson, but nope, didn't get that. Dalvin Cook with a nice touchdown run, salvaged his day. He had a 53-yarder, and then on his other carries, he was 12 for 24. So he barely got untracked. The offense didn't do much, but they did enough. Now they're on bye and they get to wait. Yeah,
and that long run for Dalvin Cook came immediately after the Jalen Waddle fumble. So the game was basically over at that point. And that fumble, I mean, it occurred inside the Minnesota 30. Like at the very least, Miami was looking at a field goal attempt to trim it to 3 with about 8 or 9 minutes left. And then you kind of, who knows from there. But yeah, so to have the fumble and then 2 plays later, Dalvin Cook rips off that touchdown. The game was essentially over at that point, and then Teddy, just for good measure, made sure to throw one last interception. But yeah, I mean,
Yep.
Minnesota's been confusing. They're lucky to be sitting at 5-1 in a lot of ways. I still don't really know how to evaluate Miami either, because they're only a few weeks away from beating a really good Bills team at home. They were the talk of the league at that point, and it really feels like this Tua situation has kind of temporarily derailed their entire season.
It really has, and he's probably going to be back next week. So because he was practicing this week, that's just, again, they're being hyper conscious of everything there and being super safe. Miami was 3-0. Now they're 3-3, and they host Pittsburgh in the Sunday night game. So we'll get to see them on a national stage, no less.
Can't wait for that one. Yeah. Although, I mean, Pittsburgh's got a little juice now, whether it's Pickett or Trubisky under center. I mean, this offense is kind of opened up. We finally got the Chase Claypool reemergence, but maybe this is our natural transition over to Bucs Steelers.
Sure. Let's go for it there. Why not? Okay. This is one of two, like, what the heck happened games for me, because this one in Seattle, Arizona, I was aggressively wrong on how this would go. Pittsburgh had like all sorts of attrition in their secondary. They've been playing so badly, and yet they were winning most of the game. And Tampa had their late chance to try to tie in the 2-point conversion. That's about it. Brady just didn't get untracked. You see him on the sideline yelling at the team. He only targeted Mike Evans 4 times. He was 4 for 42. Maybe throw to him a little bit more. I don't know. Just that it's kind of the Aaron Jones of the Bucs.
Yeah, I did not see this one coming at all. I made this my best bet in staff picks. I obviously don't feel great about that at all, especially in light of Dalton making the Steelers his best bet. I don't know what he knew in this game, but this was such an obvious get right spot for Tampa Bay. And man, I mean, this is just as concerning as what's going on with the Green Bay Packers, right? I mean, Tampa, you got Chris Godwin back. Mike Evans is healthy. Leonard Fournette is healthy. And, you still can't move the ball on a Pittsburgh Steelers team that doesn't have TJ Watt and did not have Minkah Fitzpatrick for this game. So I think it's one thing to allow 20 points to the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's a completely different scenario for this Bucs offense to not even get to 20 points in this game. And like you said, this was on the road. I was thinking it was at home for some reason. That maybe makes it slightly more excusable. But, man, these are just not the type of games that a Tom Brady quarterback team loses.
No, it's not. I will say this. Mike Tomlin is a very good coach. I know he gets, I think, some people want to discount his track record because he's had a quarterback all of his career. He's had Ben, but I don't know, man. He had them ready. This is the first game they've won without TJ Watt. I think they were 0-8 prior to that, prior to this game without TJ Watt, but they got through it somehow. They lost their quarterback in the middle of the game. Pickett suffered a concussion. Pickett was terrible, by the way. 11 for 18. Okay, that looks okay. 67 yards. It was, you thought Ben Roethlisberger was a check down artist. Pickett was 11 for 18 with 67. I mean, that's hard to do. 3.7 yards per attempt. They got by, though, with that. Pickett did have 2 scrambles for 16 yards. That helps. Trubisky came in, threw a game-winning touchdown, essentially, there to Claypool, which you do like to see Claypool come alive a little bit.
Yeah, that was nice to see. Unfortunately, it somewhat came at the expense of George Pickens, who did absolutely nothing in this game after some encouraging flashes over the last couple of weeks. Really, it was third downs. Like, the Tampa Bay defense could not get off the field when it needed to, especially in that final drive of the game. Pittsburgh, I think, converted 2 really big third downs to essentially put this one away. 7 of 15 on third down with Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett at quarterback. That's certainly not going to cut it for that defense. Fantasy-wise, kind of a disastrous day. I have my hallowed Tom Brady, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin stack in one league. Disaster, just complete disaster. You're getting the yards from Brady, but that's about it. The touchdown goes to Fournette through the air in this game. I mean, he continues to be just a huge aggregator. 21 for 63 on the ground, super inefficient day, but 6 for 38 and the touchdown through the air is kind of keeping his fantasy stock alive. I mean, Tampa Bay in the red zone couldn't get anything going at all. I mean, that's where Tom Brady typically is so good. And I'm kind of starting to buy into this narrative that they really miss having an elite tight end in these spots. I mean, they ran 17 plays on just 2 drives alone. They had 2 long field goal drives in this game. They ran 17 plays inside the Pittsburgh 15-yard line and could not get a touchdown.
Yeah, brutal. So, and time of possession was equal. Yards were relatively equal. This was an equal game, but the Bucs were 9.5-point favorites. It shouldn't have been an equal game. And it climbed as the week went on. Everybody was trying to pile on. No Minkah Fitzpatrick. Okay, there's another point. Let's do it. But didn't happen. They have to kind of figure things out pretty quickly here. The Bucs do, and they this week, what do they do? They've got on the road against Carolina. Theoretically, a get well game, but we've seen some, theory versus reality has changed a lot of times. Saints were supposed to get well at Carolina, and it didn't happen. So you never know.
Yeah, I mean, Carolina looked pretty frisky even for half of that game against the Rams this week. I mean, the PJ Walker experience was not great, but even in the first half, I mean, they put up a fight. Yeah,
they did. We'll talk a little bit more about that game. Still got a couple more. We still have Baltimore, the Giants. Still got all the afternoon games and the night game. We'll keep going down that in a second here. But first, there are 50 million fantasy sports players and sports bettors in the U.S., but 90% of all cash prizes are only won by 2% of players. That's because most sports gaming options were created for pros. The dudes dropping loads of cash on data to find an edge over the rest of us. Not Swagger. Swagger is a daily fantasy sports site created for sports fans who simply want some skin in the game and a real shot at winning. Tired of losing because of one bad pick? With Swagger, you don't need to be perfect to win. You simply create a ticket of 4 to 10 simple player props and score points for the ones you get right. Your score determines your win, not the perfect ticket. You can be half right and be all right with Swagger. Swagger offers the most player props and biggest payouts of any DFS site, as much as 50 times your money. Plus, you can play fantasy football along with all the major U.S. pro sports, as well as international soccer, Formula One, NASCAR, fight sports, rugby, cricket, and even esports. Ready to play? Visit playwithswagger.com/RotoWire to sign up, and Swagger will give you $10 free to try them out, plus match your first deposit 100% up to $100. Swagger, daily fantasy for all fankind. Thanks to Swagger for their sponsorship. Here with Nick Whalen, one more game in the early slate, and that is the Giants pulling the upset over the Ravens. Home upset. Team that was 4-1 and a home underdog. They are now 5-1. And this was all about just a total late game collapse by the Ravens. The Giants stole one. I feel like they did. It was kind of a smash and grab, but it was a smash and grab at home. Usually don't do that at your own home.
Yeah. Almost never. But credit to the Giants for hanging around and being in position to capitalize on that just horrific interception by Lamar Jackson late in this game. I mean, the type of plays that you don't see from great quarterbacks like Lamar all that often. But I think he panicked. He kind of wasn't expecting the snap, picked it up, and instead of throwing it away, just kind of whips it downfield. I believe he was looking for Patrick Ricard, an easy interception for the Giants, and then all of a sudden they're in business. And a couple plays later in the end zone. And Baltimore still had a chance after that. They get the ball back with about 1:43 remaining. 2 plays later, sack fumble by Kayvon Thibodeau. Game is over. I mean, it never felt like, Baltimore had fully put this game away, but it was the type of scenario that we've seen them in so many times. And that, they're always kind of able to get that key first down. They're better than almost any team at kind of moving the ball on the ground, running clock, still being productive. So it was a shocking result. That's for sure. And like I said at the top, I really thought this would be the week that would be a reckoning for the New York Giants. I thought the Ravens were a kind of a tough matchup for them. I thought this was finally a spot for a big letdown for New York. And man, we got the complete opposite. And all of a sudden the Ravens lose another tight game. And it feels like they're better than they are, but man, they're 3-3 right now. They had that tough blown loss against the Dolphins in week 2, kind of similar loss against the Bills a couple of weeks ago. And now here we go again against the Giants. 3 losses now by a combined 11 points on the year for the Ravens.
Yep. This is much like Minnesota, Miami. Baltimore outgained the Giants by 170 yards, 168 to be specific. But, they were the better statistical team, but, you have the turnovers. They're just horrific turnovers and horrifically timed turnovers both. Yep. They had 10 penalties for 74 yards. I mean, you can't get away with that sort of stuff. You just can't. They got to Daniel Jones. They sacked him 4 times. They forced 1 turnover of their own. But you know what? That it just they came up small at the absolute wrong moments.
Yep, exactly. And much like we saw the Giants do to Green Bay last week, converted a ton of key third downs in that second half. They put together these long drives. I mean, even if it ends in a field goal, like their second drive did, took up virtually the entire third quarter. They go on a 14-play, 8-minute drive. That wears on a defense, man. And then right after that, another 12-play drive, another 8-minute drive, going all the way down the field for a touchdown. I mean, that to me has been the most impressive thing for this Giants team. I mean, it's not they're not hitting a ton of big plays. They didn't even have a 20-yard play in this game, passing or through the air. I mean, Saquon Barkley, for the most part, bottled up, did get in the end zone, but 83 yards on 22 carries. It's just been the ability to convert with these well below average skill position players in key spots. I mean, we got to give credit to guys like Daniel Bellinger and Darius Slayton and Richie James and David Sills, and the list goes on. But on paper, at least, this is a bottom 5 group of pass catchers that are now sitting at 5-1. It really kind of defies logic.
It does. It really does. Wan'Dale Robinson got his first touchdown. He might be a critical add to this, this team. We did a sneaky ads video, Alan and I did, and both Wan'Dale Robinson and Daniel Bellinger were mentioned. They're just trying to find some skill position players to chip in here, but so it's not just the Barkley show. Barkley was favoring his shoulder late in this game, almost used as a decoy a little bit until the very end. Then he was used and did the purposeful not score thing. That was huge for them. Kind of huge for us too, but at least he did get 1 touchdown. So it wasn't a complete 0 for us there. Baltimore 2 games in a row without Rashad Bateman. I think they really miss him.
Big time. It really felt like those first 3-4 games of the year, he had taken that next step. Not toward being like a legitimate, star number 1 receiver, but the closest thing that the Ravens had to that, alongside Mark Andrews. And not having him has been huge. Led to another big game for Andrews, 7 for 106 and a touchdown. He and Travis Kelce at this point are lapping the field when it comes to production. I mean, especially in PPR. I mean, there's like a 50 fantasy point gap between Mark Andrews and then the number 3 tight end, Zach Ertz. So those two continue to kind of run circles around everybody else. But yeah, I mean, Devin Duvernay he's had some big plays here and there. He was basically shut out in this game. I think this is really the first time where it was extremely noticeable that they needed Bateman.
Yeah, that's right. There's some missed opportunities here for Baltimore too. They missed a field goal. Of course, it's 56 yards off the upright, whatever. But it's Justin Tucker. Always like, yeah. Mark Andrews dropped a touchdown pass, and they had to settle for a field goal.
That was huge.
It was a slight tip on that, but it's Mark Andrews. You got to catch that, and that was huge. I mean, you and I are standing there like, okay, fine, whatever.
I would have got that.
I probably would have muffed it, but I would not have ever been open. So thus
I would have been injured by the first play I ever played. I always maintain that if for whatever reason I was on the field in an NFL game, I would either fumble and or get hurt every single play.
Oh, I get broken so much. The only thing is I'm so slow, and people who play soccer with me can attest to this. I would never get open. So I would never be targeted. So
hopefully this is something we'll never have to find out in real life. I would say very likely that you and I are never on an NFL roster.
Yeah. How about the RotoWire flag football game? We should reinstitute that. We did that in Vegas 2 years.
That's what I heard. I think that was before I joined the Vegas crew, but I would love to do something like that. Even a pickup basketball game would be fun.
Yeah. Well, that would, you would see my speed there too. Be fun times. But all right. So there you go. Other thing. Note Dobbins out in the second half. He was 7 for 15 in the first half. Knee tightened up. Kenyon Drake actually looked good. I mean, that's got to be probative for the future a little bit there, that they have to go with the guy they can trust.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Kenyon Drake actually looked good in this game. He was kind of one of the few positives for Baltimore, which, for the second straight week, got a subpar Lamar game. Lamar did have 7 for 77 on the ground, so you can only complain so much. But yeah, Kenyon Drake, I mean, had a couple long runs in this game, 10 for 119 and a touchdown. I mean, Baltimore still ran for over 200 yards on 24 carries in this game. So they were productive. Like you said, kind of the theme of this week is one team, possesses the ball, looks like the better team. But then when you look at the scoreboard at the end of the game, they're on the wrong side of it.
Yeah. They draw Cleveland at home next week. So, I'm going to have a hard time ranking Drake. But it's a smash matchup in a week where Buffalo, the Rams, the Vikings, and the Eagles are all on bye. There's some good fantasy players that are going to be out this week. So, I think you're going to see some big bids on Kenyon Drake, and I'm not really there for that. But at the same time, any port in a storm, and that is your guy to turn to this week.
Yeah, I mean, the Browns are right on the cusp of being a bottom 5 defense when it comes to stopping the rush. Chargers, Giants, Lions, Seahawks, Texans, Browns. Those have been the worst defenses against the rush this year. So I think absolutely a spot for Kenyon Drake in the event that J.K. Dobbins is limited. But it feels like anything can reverse week to week. There's been so many of these smash spots, and then all of a sudden the game arrives, and you're like, how is this not going this way?
Which is a perfect segue into our next game.
Yeah.
Seattle and Arizona. What in fresh hell was that? That was just such a disappointing, unfulfilling matchup. I mean, it had the benefit of going up against KC and Buffalo, so people weren't paying close attention to it. I'm going to have to do the rewatch of this game after just to figure out what the heck went on. But before we even get a response to that, there is news. Arizona has traded for Robbie Anderson. Huge, if true. But it just demonstrates, Robbie Anderson get kicked out of the sideline, got sent to the bench in their game. So Arizona's getting DeAndre Hopkins back next week. What are they going to do with Robbie Anderson?
This comes on the heels of some more news from Adam Schefter, who 10 minutes ago tweeted that Marquise Brown suffered a potentially season-ending foot injury.
Oh, there you go.
On Sunday. So I think there's some motivation to get that speed factor in there with Hollywood, potentially done for the year, or at the very least seemingly done for the next half the season. You would think. I mean, I think the best case scenario is he would probably go on some sort of short-term IR. So that's probably the motivation there. I mean, obviously it seemed like Robbie Anderson was going to be gone one way or another after what happened yesterday. That's usually how those situations go. But I mean, for Arizona, if you're replacing Marquise Brown with Robbie Anderson, that's a pretty big downgrade. But like you said, you at least get DeAndre Hopkins back to hopefully get this ship righted. This was a really weird game in the afternoon window. I ended up watching a decent amount of it because there were only 3 games going on, and there was really nothing happening in the Carolina Rams game. So when Red Zone wasn't on Buffalo KC, it was on this one. And it feels like a letdown scoring wise. The over-under, I think, closed at like 51.5. So came nowhere near there. But I mean, Seattle left a ton of points on the board in this game. A lot of really strong drives that ended in field goals, especially in the first half. And I mean, this was a really sloppy game for Arizona. You would never guess that they were playing the Seahawks defense. I mean, I thought this was a great spot for Arizona. I mean, Kyler Murray sacked 6 times by Seattle. Kyler Murray getting sacked at all is crazy given his elusiveness. He just did not have that at all in this game. Did run for 100 yards on 10 carries, but took some tough sacks on 3rd downs and even 4th downs. Just an out of sorts game for Arizona.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just the whole game. I mean, just Murray had that long run on their first drive, and I'm like, okay, this is delivering right away. Murray had that 42-yard run. We're like, okay, it's going to get some scoring. They settled for a field goal, and those were their last offensive points the entire game. That's it. That's
they had a big fumble late in the 3rd quarter. They were putting together a drive, and Kyler Murray, 3rd and 6, looked like he was bottled up, gets out of it, scrambles away, and it was kind of a Jalen Waddle type of fumble where he just squirted out of his hands right into the hands of a Seattle defender. And after that, they were pretty much able to take care of business. Although, they had a punt that was going to be blocked in the end zone. And for the 2nd straight week, their punter just declined to punt it and instead just took just basically handed the ball to Arizona for a touchdown. So for as badly as Arizona played, they were gifted an opportunity to get back into this game on that was essentially ruled a fumble return for a touchdown. At that point, it's a 12-9 game. You just need one stop. And Seattle, which at that point really had not been moving the ball at all for a few drives, is able to march down for a touchdown. And that was about it. But yeah, overall, I mean, disappointing game for Arizona going up against this defense, but also relatively disappointing game for Seattle because this Arizona defense has not been fantastic. I mean, there were a ton of 3-and-outs for the Seahawks in this game. We didn't see much out of DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett. Obviously, Geno Smith not even getting to 200 yards, which, it's Geno Smith, but I think expectations have kind of changed for him now.
Yep. I started him over Mariota in a super flex. I would have started him in some single QB leagues where I needed it, but absolutely very disappointed game. Kenneth Walker had one good size run, got a touchdown, an 11-yard run, but he's overall 21 of 90 for 97. Only 2 catches, was targeted 3 times. What did you make out of his first start?
I thought he looked really good. Running wise, he had a couple runs that looked like he was going to be stopped for a 2-yard gain. All of a sudden, he's carrying guys for a 7-yard gain. So I think in terms of the eye test, he absolutely passed it. It looked to me like he was going up against a defense that knew he was going to be getting the ball 20 plus times. So there were not not a lot of lanes for Kenneth Walker. But overall, I'm really encouraged. I think in a game where Seattle just kind of didn't seem to have that same magic that they've had offensively this season, for him to still, basically get to 100 yards, get a touchdown on the ground, rip off that 30-yarder, had a couple of catches for only 13 yards, but still 2 catches. You're not going to complain about that. We did see DJ Dallas, as the spellback in this game. He got 23 snaps compared to 47 for Kenneth Walker, but I still feel really good about Walker the rest of the way. And I think this Seattle offense, as weird as it is to say, I mean, this is really their only second letdown performance of the entire year. The other one being that 49ers game. They get the Chargers next week. That's a pretty advantageous spot to run the ball.
Yep. 11 sacks combined in this game, 12 penalties combined in this game. Just a sloppy offensive game.
It was.
Arizona plays Thursday night, by the way. So short turnaround for them. They're hosting the Saints, who are really banged up. So it might be an injury fest. The Saints were missing their top 3 receivers. I think Olave will be back. He was close.
Yeah.
But Thomas and Landry haven't been close. Looks like no Hollywood Brown. Hopkins coming back finally. We'll see what happens with Arizona, but both offensive lines kind of stunk in this one, and that's kind of the problem. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But I think you'll see like the Saints running a lot against Arizona. So we'll see how that goes. Let's do one more piece of business, and then we'll finish up the slate for this week. Football is officially back on Monkey Knife Fight with all the NFL action you're looking for. And if college football is more your speed, they've got plenty of that too. On Monkey Knife Fight, there's no sharks, no salary caps, and no math. It's just easy to play, easy to win, daily fantasy player props. Join now at monkeyknifefight.com and you'll get your first game free. Then use promo code RWNFL to get your first deposit matched instantly up to $100. So what are you waiting for? Join Monkey Knife Fight today. All right. It was a small afternoon slate yet again. Once again, 3 games in the afternoon window. Carolina and the Rams were one of those games. So let's just pound this one out here real quick. Actually, I mean, there's stuff. I mean, we saw Jacob Eason make his debut. We saw PJ Walker with another start. It was not pretty. Not as expected. They weren't able to do much in the air. Christian McCaffrey was essentially the only fantasy player for the Panthers of note. DJ Moore is just all DJ Moore owners are going to the corner and crying right now because it's just they're, you think Baker Mayfield was bad? Well, get a load of me.
Yeah, I kind of thought there might be a anybody but Baker bounce for this offense. And obviously PJ Walker kind of an exciting player. We had just seen enough for Baker that it's like, all right, just throw anybody else out there. It has to be better. It was not better. PJ Walker did not complete a pass that traveled more than 1 yard in the air in this game. He had 10 completions. They were all quick passes or screens. It was pretty disastrous. But somehow Carolina led this game at the half. I mean, this was not the 2-score convincing victory that it necessarily looks like when you see the 24-10 final. Matthew Stafford threw a horrific pick 6 late in the first half. The Rams get the ball back. They immediately go 3 and out. I mean, this looked like a potential crisis situation for the Rams before they got things settled down and ended up getting some big stops and a couple big drives in the second half. But still, I mean, the Panthers were so limited offensively in this game that I think if you're the Rams, you still come out of this feeling like a little queasy about how the offense looked.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of turmoil in Rams camp right now. I mean, their offensive line, they've got one healthy offensive lineman at his original position.
They lost their left tackle in this game too.
Yeah, Noteboom got hurt. Yep. Then so they're down to one of their original starters essentially. And it shows. Cam Akers is seeing God right now, or something. They're figuring things out. Supposedly on amicable terms, but they said go away at the same time.
I don't think he's playing another snap for this team this year. It doesn't sound like it.
I kind of feel the same way. Kyren Williams, that's your stash pickup of the week. They're on bye this week, so you obviously can't play him. And I don't even know what sort of a role Williams will have comes back, but they drafted him. Precious few draft picks. They were big on him. And at one point pre-combine, he was a buzzy name. He wasn't great. He wasn't great in the combine. He's been hurt. Obviously had the ankle injury, but I think they need some sort of explosion. And Henderson's fine, but again, who knows, because this offensive line's such disarray right now. Malcolm Brown ain't it. They're trying to find ways to involve Brandon Powell, and sure, that's great. But they need some other burst from the running game. They did discover that Allen Robinson exists.
They did.
Kudos to that. It was more than just a fade pattern in the end zone, though. That's how they did score. But 5 for 63. Yay.
Yeah, this was easily the best game of the year for Allen Robinson. Not only had that fade in the end zone, that's kind of become his signature route, I guess, with the Rams. It was kind of the only thing he was subsisting on for a couple of weeks, but had a couple big catches, catches and runs, which feels like we haven't seen Allen Robinson do that in like 3 years in this game. So yeah, that was kind of the lone bright spot for the Rams fantasy wise, was Allen Robinson somewhat waking up. So if you were in a position where you had to throw him in your lineup, that did pay off this week. But the Rams had to resort to a lot of gimmicks, it felt like, offensively in this game just to move the ball. I mean, you had like 7 or 8 guys carry the ball in this game. You're running reverses. A man named Ronnie Rivers was involved in the game plan. Their third running back. Like you mentioned, we saw Malcolm Brown, we saw Brandon Powell get involved. Ben Skoranek had a few carries in this game as well. I mean, they were just looking for any way to move the ball against this Panthers defense, which, by the way, is not that bad of a unit. I think it gets lumped in to the entire Panthers disaster, but the offense has been the primary issue for the Rams this season. I mean, the defense gave them a pick 6 in this game. For the most part, it held up, until a couple of late touchdowns, but it's also difficult when, your defense is on the bench for like 3 minutes and has to go right back in. I mean, the time of possession in this game was 37 minutes to 23 minutes in favor of the Rams.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just not, and they moved the ball early, and then that was about it. And, McCaffrey, I mean, he was their offense again. They didn't have an offensive touchdown though, so that makes it hard. And he got there in yards, and if you're in a PPR league, 7 catches will go a long way towards getting your scoring. He's almost completely offense proof, which is hard to be, but he is that. All right, the game of the week of the century this week was the Bills and Chiefs. Probably the best matchup of the year, right? But I think you felt a little disappointed a little bit because there are so many unfulfilled drives. There were turnovers in the red zone. There were 4th down failures, some critical sacks and penalties. I mean, I think part of that's a function of the Bills are just a really good defense. And I thought the Chiefs defense actually stepped up for quite a bit of this game too.
I thought the Chiefs defense played really well. I think this is a game that I don't think anybody would have been surprised if it was played in the high 30s. I mean, even into the low 40s with how good these teams are. So I think if you told Kansas City, hey, you're holding Buffalo to 24 points on your home field, you'd feel pretty good about that, right? Yeah, I think you'd expect that you would score more than 24. And early on, it looked like, Kansas City would. They go down, they have the interception in the end zone on their first possession. Just Mahomes doing a little too much. Probably just need to throw that ball away as he's drifting toward the sideline. But both teams left a ton of points on the board, like you said.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bills had that fumble. They go marching down on their first 2 drives. They have the sloppy fumble on the first one, and then they have to settle for a field goal on the second. Their third drive of the game, they once again march all the way down inside the Kansas City 5-yard line. Didn't love the play call there, although Isaiah McKenzie, he had a rough night, rough afternoon, I should say. It almost looked like he kind of like tripped or kind of tensed up a little bit. It wasn't a perfect throw from Josh Allen, who was under duress, but very catchable. And McKenzie, his body just kind of didn't cooperate with what he needed to do there. But I mean, clutch plays from Buffalo in this game. They get the long touchdown before the half. And then, of course, Josh Allen, converted a 4th down, converted another key 3rd down on that final 12-play drive before hitting Dawson Knox for a really tough touchdown on a 2nd and long. So you got to come away really impressed with the Bills. And then, especially their defense. Every single person in the world watching this game, when Buffalo scores with 1:04 left, is saying, oh boy, this is way too much time for Patrick Mahomes. And all of a sudden, 2 minutes later, 2 plays later, the game's over. It was kind of a shocking end.
It was. It really was. They used Devin Singletary quite a bit. And this one here, 17 for 85. He actually looked pretty good. and 4 catches as well. Zach Moss was inactive for this game. I thought maybe they'd reveal a little more James Cook. That didn't happen. 2 carries, no targets. Khalil Shakir with McKenzie back only had 2 targets, a lot fewer snaps. I wanted to see more Shakir because he can play. And maybe McKenzie's struggles might encourage him to play Shakir more after the bye. We'll see what happens with that. They do get the bye this week. The Chiefs, they have to go on the road to face a desperate 49ers team. Going to be 3-3, really kind of in an angry spot. They're going to be geared up for this one. There's no doubt about it. Chiefs often take teams' best shots. They took the Colts' best shot earlier this year when their other loss. So we'll see. But I think the Chiefs have a problem stopping the pass. Can the Niners exploit that? I'm not so sure. But, top receivers for opposing teams are going for 100 yards almost every single week against the Chiefs.
Yeah, they are. And against the Bills, I think that's acceptable for sure. Just a really difficult team to keep under wraps. But yeah, that does kind of seem to be the hindrance for this defense right now. And I thought they did a good job against the Bucs a couple of weeks ago. Did end up allowing a decent amount of points in the second half of that game. But that Raiders game last week, a little bit concerning, certainly what Devontae Adams was able to do.
Sure. Your boy Juju actually had a big game.
Sure
got
did.
in the end zone, 5 for 113. You'd like to see a little bit more volume, but he really was efficient with it there. Edwards-Helaire was bottled up. Nobody else really contributed much. The running game was kind of absent. And Mecole Hardman scored, actually had a couple other nice plays, but all in all, I mean, it wasn't a bad game by the Chiefs. Mahomes went for 338. Did you get sacked 3 times? It threw those 2 picks, including the late one there, which was just a really good, a bad throw by Mahomes, but bad in that he didn't see the zone. He didn't see the guy coming across.
Just a shocking play by Mahomes, right? I mean, for most quarterbacks, you would just kind of say like, well, great play by the defense, but Mahomes, especially the way he had been manipulating, the entire game, it just felt like he really had it. I mean, he had it going. Coming into this game, I actually thought Buffalo would win a little more convincingly. I thought they would be really determined, to avenge that loss last year. I thought you could see Kansas City having a bit of a letdown in a game where the other team clearly values it more than you do, but that was not the case. I mean, KC came out. They looked like the better team, I thought, for most of the game. I kind of found myself regretting betting on the Bills, but yeah, it turned out in the end that they were able to pull it out. But I, along with the rest of America, thought for sure the Chiefs were at least going to have a chance to score a touchdown on that final drive.
Yeah. Big thing here, too, is puts Bills in the commander seat there for home field advantage for the playoffs, which, the Chiefs traditionally are the, host the AFC Championship game. Now that's always been a formula for success, as we saw last year, and we saw with the Pats 3 years ago. So, or 4 years ago, excuse me. But point is, it's going to, we may have a slight changing of the guard in terms of like who's going to be the favorite going through. Final game, Eagles 6-0 now on Sunday night. Once again, first half 20 points. Second half, 6 points. This wasn't a huge offensive performance for the Eagles, but they did come through at the right time. The defense really stepped up in this one, made Cooper Rush look very ordinary in this game.
Yeah, this was the Cooper Rush kind of turning back into a pumpkin type of game. And all 3 interceptions. One of them, I think the last one, he was kind of hit as he threw. Ended up going way short to CeeDee Lamb. But yeah, first 2 interceptions were kind of uncharacteristic, really. From what we've seen from Cooper Rush, who's been the ultimate game manager for the Cowboys prior to this game. But yeah, you said it. I mean, this got way dicier than we ever thought it would when Philly's up 20-0 late in the first half. I walked away. I started doing some NBA stuff. All of a sudden I look and it's 20-17 after a long touchdown drive by the Dallas Cowboys. But big time credit to the Eagles for responding at that point with a touchdown. I mean, they absolutely needed to go down and not get a field goal, but get a touchdown because it felt like all the momentum had transferred over to the Dallas Cowboys. They were running the ball well. They were kind of beating up the Eagles defense for a couple of drives. And in steps Jalen Hurts, really, really steady 13-play drive, converted 3 separate 3rd and shorts, and then hits Devontae Smith for, at that point, kind of felt like the dagger touchdown. Philly goes up by 9 with 7 minutes left. And then, that's when we get the Cooper Rush final interception to seal it. But I do think if you're Dallas, you come away feeling okay about this, right? You say, look, we battled back from down 20-0. We were down 3, and then our backup quarterback threw his 3rd interception of the day. I think it's pretty easy if you're Dallas to convince yourself that you have a really good chance to win this game if Dak Prescott is healthy and under center.
Yeah, and it looks like he's pretty close. We'll see what happens this upcoming week. It quiets all the talk about whether who should start going forward, though. That's for sure.
Mhm.
Dallas hosts Detroit next week. Theoretically, a pretty good get well game, offensively at least. So we'll see how that happens, but a pretty big spot for them to be able to turn around. They're still 4-2. They just happen to be in a bad spot in the division now that they're 2 games behind and 1 game in hand
Mhm.
against the Eagles, who now get to rest on bye this upcoming week. That last interception, Gardner Johnson, pretty sweet pick.
Oh yeah, really nice pick by him. I do think if you're Dallas overall, you'll take it. You'll say, look, all right, Dak Prescott gets hurt in the first game of the year, and we go 3-1 without him. I think you're okay with that. The one loss, especially coming to what might be the
4-1.
best team in the league, right? 4-1. Excuse me, yeah,
4-1.
4-1
Yeah.
without Dak Prescott. This is basically the best case scenario. And even the loss to Dallas, or the loss to Philly, like I said, you don't feel that bad about it. I want to ask you, where do we start talking, potential, can they go 17-0 for the Eagles? And the way that this NFL season has gone, I'm like fully expecting them to somehow lose at home to the Steelers next week. But here are their next few games: Steelers, Texans, Commanders,
And that's in 2
Colts,
weeks.
Packers. Yes, they're on bye, and then the Steelers. Yes. They're going to be, I don't see a game where they'll be underdogs the rest of the way. At Dallas in week 16, we'll see where those two teams are at that point. But I think they'll be considerable favorites at 80% of their remaining games.
Yeah, the Colts game's in Indy. Indy
Yep.
did beat the Chiefs for crying out loud. So,
Yeah.
by the way,
And the
we
Jags.
were talking earlier about how the Colts are in trouble. They're 3-2-1 now. And they get a rematch game against the Titans this upcoming week. Huge game in the division. And they're going to be basically done with their division games. I'll have one Houston game later on, but massive game for the Colts. And what a turnaround. They're this mirage team, but here they are 3-2-1 in a decent spot. At the Cowboys might be favored in that one. We'll see. It's a long way away. That's all the way back on Christmas Eve, though. We're talking here. So yes, it is a friendly schedule. They're tough. Their toughest games are at home. Packers and Titans are at home. They have a home and away still with the Giants. Those are huge games, obviously.
Mhm.
Yeah, but this is, the end. There's always a letdown game somewhere. It seems like. So I'd say very still. 17-0 odds are. It's non-zero, but it's less than 5%.
Yeah, it's just interesting because there's not an obvious, it's like they don't play like at Buffalo in week 12 or something like that. It's just, you kind of have to say like, yeah, on balance, they're going to get tripped up by someone. But when you take a look at each individual game, it's hard to say like, yes, the Eagles will lose to that team. They have to play the Giants twice. Suddenly those look much more difficult than they did a few weeks ago. Like we said, at Dallas, that'll be tough. They get the Saints late. Maybe Green Bay has things turned around by the end of November. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Big thing for them too is they get this week here to get healthy. They were starting to get a little banged up. Their offense has started to slow down just a little bit. So, I think for them, it's pretty big deal there, just that they were able to get, to get through this, get that big win against one of their 2 big division rivals and, lick their wounds a little bit here. So like getting a healthy Jordan Mailata is something that's probably really big for this team. He played, but I don't know if he was at 100%. This offense certainly wasn't as dynamic as it was earlier in the year. So, they took advantage of some short fields and they got what they needed to get done. Now they get to go rest. I think it's perfect timing for them.
Yeah, good Dallas defense too. Nothing changes there. So obviously the Eagles are a tough matchup for anybody, but I think with a backup quarterback, sometimes it just kind of leads you to lower expectations for the entire team. But
right.
As steady as Cooper Rush had been coming into this week, it's the defense that's really been keeping the Cowboys afloat without Dak Prescott. And overall, obviously had some letdowns in the first half, but it was another encouraging performance. This defense, especially with the Bucs taking some steps back, I think Dallas to me is probably the most impressive defense that we've seen wire to wire so far.
Absolutely about that. All right. Any other takeaways from this week before we sign off? We had a lot of them.
No, we hit everything. That's the benefit of going game by game. I did just see a note that the Cardinals looks like they have lost their starting left guard, Justin Pugh. Another injury to monitor. Yeah. It looks like a fear of a season-ending injury, so he'll almost certainly, remain out Thursday against the Saints and likely for the entire year. But we got to move quickly with the way the NFL schedule goes. It's fun recapping these games, but we're a couple days away from having to prepare for Saints at Cardinals.
Yeah, and Cardinals, so much going on there. We'll be tracking Hollywood Brown. Certainly going to miss this week and possibly season ending there with that foot injury there.
Mm-hmm.
So brutal injury as far as that goes. All right. Big thanks to No House Advantage for hosting all of our football podcasts throughout the season. We are going to sign off here from now, but we got Joe and Jake tomorrow at the free agent podcast, and a lot to talk about with Arizona for sure. They'll weigh in on Robbie Anderson at the very least there, and we'll see a little bit more as we find out more. Thanks everybody for listening. Have a great day.